I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the first thing you should know. The last one had hollowed me out so completely that my own ribs felt like a vacant cage, a place where something vital used to live and beat and sing, but now only echoed. I had made a vow, a solemn promise to myself in the sterile quiet of my new empty apartment, that I was done, done with the dizzying highs that always crashed into devastating lows. Done with the way another woman's scent could overwrite my own thoughts. Done with the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of letting someone see the softest parts of you, only to watch them use that knowledge as a weapon. So I built my fortress here, on the third floor of a nondescript brick building, with walls of solitude and a moat of deliberate, curated loneliness. My life had shrunk to the size of these 2 rooms, my work-from-home job, and the predictable rhythm of my own quiet company. It was safe. It was sterile. It was survivable. The apartment itself was a testament to this new asceticism. Bare walls, a couch the color of a cloudy sky, a single coffee mug. The air inside was still, holding only the scent of old books and the faint, clean smell of the lemon dish soap I used. Outside, the world was preparing for a tantrum. The sky had been bruising all afternoon, a deep, moody purple that pressed down on the city, silencing the birds and sending people scurrying. The air was thick and heavy, charged with the electric promise of a summer storm. I was watching the first fat drops of rain begin to streak the grime on my window pane, feeling a grim sort of satisfaction. The weather matched my mood. Let it rage. It couldn't get in. And then, a knock. It was a sound so alien in my self-imposed exile that I flinched. No one knocked on my door. Packages were left in the lobby. My one remaining friend knew to text first. A prearranged warning system to give me time to assemble a passable version of myself. This knock was different. It was soft, hesitant, but persistent. 3 gentle raps, a pause, then 3 again. I considered ignoring it. It was the easiest thing to do, the default setting for the woman I had become. But a flicker of something, not quite curiosity, more like a splinter of my old self lodging itself under my skin, propelled me to my feet. I peered through the peephole, the fisheye lens distorting the hallway into a curved, strange world. Standing there was a woman, my new neighbor from 3B, the one I'd only seen in passing. A fleeting impression of dark, unruly curls and a worn denim jacket. She was shifting her weight from foot to foot, looking down at her scuffed boots as if they held the answer to a question she was afraid to ask. I saw the line of her shoulders, the way she held herself with a kind of quiet solidity, and I felt a familiar, unwelcome tug in my gut. I took a breath, turned the deadbolt with a loud, definitive clunk, and opened the door. She looked up, startled, and a pair of eyes the color of moss and damp earth met mine. They were calm, strikingly so, given her nervous posture. "Hi," she said, her voice a little rough like old velvet. "Sorry to bother you. This is the quintessential weird neighbor thing to do." A small, self-deprecating smile touched her lips. "I'm Alara from 3B. I just ran out of coffee. Like, completely. And with this storm coming," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely towards the window at the end of the hall, where the sky was now a churning slate gray. "I was just wondering if I could possibly borrow a scoop or 2. I can pay you back tomorrow first thing." I stared at her, at the smudge of what looked like charcoal on her cheekbone, at the way a few damp curls clung to her temple. My mind was screaming at me to say no. "No, I don't have any. No, I'm busy. No, this is my fortress, and you are not welcome inside." Because letting her in even for a moment felt like a breach, a crack in the foundation of the careful, sterile life I was trying to build. The last time a woman with kind eyes stood on my doorstep, it had ended with me packing my life into cardboard boxes in the middle of the night, the sound of my own weeping swallowed by the silence of a home that was no longer mine. but the words that came out of my mouth were not the ones my fear had written. "Yeah," I heard myself say, the single syllable feeling rusty and foreign. "Sure, come in." I stepped back, holding the door open, and as she crossed the threshold, she brought the smell of rain and something else, something warm and earthy like sawdust and soil, into my quiet, scentless space. The fortress had been breached. She stood awkwardly in the small entryway, her hands shoved into the pockets of her jacket, taking in my Spartan living room. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of self-consciousness. The emptiness of the space seemed to shout my story, to announce my retreat from the world. Chloe's apartments had always been riots of color and texture, overflowing with art and throw pillows and life. Mine was a void. "It's very minimalist," Alara observed, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a diagnosis. Her gaze wasn't judgmental, though. It was just observant, the way a carpenter might look at a piece of wood, seeing its grain and potential, not just its surface. "I just moved in," I lied, the falsehood slipping out easily. It was easier than saying I purged my life of everything that reminded me of someone else. "Right." She nodded slowly, her eyes lingering on the single lonely print I'd hung on the wall, a stark black and white photograph of a winter forest. "Coffee's this way," I said, my voice clipped. I led her into the small kitchen, hyper-aware of her presence behind me. She was taller than I'd realized, and she moved with a quiet economy, a grace that seemed at odds with the anxious energy she displayed in the hallway. I opened a cupboard, pulling down the bag of dark roast beans. My hands felt clumsy. I was acutely aware of her standing just a few feet away, of the space she took up in my small kitchen, of the warmth radiating from her body. It was an invasion, a gentle one, but an invasion nonetheless. "I really appreciate this," she said, her voice softer now. "My grinder gave up the ghost this morning, mid-grind. It was tragic. A ghost of a smile tugged at my own lips before I could stop it. A caffeinated tragedy, the worst kind. The banter felt strange, a muscle I hadn't used in months. She laughed, a low, genuine sound that seemed to warm the sterile white of the kitchen. Exactly, you get it. I measured a generous amount of beans into a Ziploc bag, my movements stiff and deliberate. Every second she was in my apartment felt like a minute too long. I needed her to leave. I needed to be alone again, where the only person I had to worry about was myself. The memory of Chloe was a phantom at my shoulder, whispering warnings. See how easy it is to let them in, to let them get close? You know how this ends. Chloe had started with borrowing a book. It had seemed so harmless then, too. "Here," I said, pushing the bag across the counter towards her. "This should get you through the storm." The implication was clear. Take it and go. She picked up the bag, her fingers brushing against mine for a fleeting second. Her skin was warm and slightly rough, calloused. A shock, small but sharp, went through me. It was the first time I had touched another person in weeks, other than the perfunctory brush of a cashier's hand. I pulled my own hand back as if I'd been burned. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in its cage. I hated this. I hated the way my body betrayed me, reacting with an instinct I was trying so desperately to kill. "Thanks," she said, her moss-green eyes meeting mine again. She seemed to notice my reaction, the slight tremor in my hand. A flicker of something, curiosity, concern, crossed her face, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, her gaze shifted to the window above my sink. Outside, the world had gone dark. The rain was coming down in solid, blinding sheets, and a low, guttural rumble of thunder shook the building. "Wow," she murmured. "That came on fast." Just then, both our phones buzzed in unison, a shrill, synchronized alarm. I glanced at mine. A bright red banner screamed across the screen. "Flash flood warning, immediate. Seek higher ground. Alara read the same message, her brow furrowing. Huh? Seek higher ground. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. My apartment is garden level. The garden is about to become a lake. My stomach clenched. I knew what I had to do, what any decent human being would do. But every cell in my body rebelled against it. The thought of her staying, of this temporary breach becoming a prolonged occupation, sent a wave of panic through me. But the image of her in a flooding apartment, of her, quiet solidity being washed away, was worse. My carefully constructed solitude was a luxury, not a necessity for survival. Her safety was. You should probably stay here, I said, the words tasting like ash. Until it passes. You're on the 3rd floor here. It's safe. Alara looked from the terrifying display on her phone to my face, her expression unreadable. She was hesitating. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She didn't want to impose any more than I wanted to be imposed upon. We were two strangers, two solitudes, pushed together by the indifferent violence of the weather. Are you sure? She asked, her voice low. I don't want to be in your way. You are in my way, I wanted to scream. You're in the way of my misery, in the way of my isolation, in the way of my vow to never feel anything for anyone ever again. I'm sure, I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. It's fine. It was the biggest lie I'd told all year. So she stayed. The storm raged outside, a wild, percussive symphony of wind and water, and Alara, my neighbor, the woman with sawdust in her hair and calluses on her hands, sat on the edge of my gray couch. The fortress had not just been breached, it was now under occupation, an army of one, and I had no idea how to defend myself. She was quiet, unobtrusive. After a few stilted attempts at small talk that I effectively shut down with one-word answers, she seemed to take the hint. She pulled a small, worn sketchbook and a pencil from her jacket pocket, as if she carried them everywhere, and began to draw. I pretended to read a book, but the words swam before my eyes. I couldn't focus. My awareness was entirely consumed by her presence. I watched her from over the top of my book. I watched the way she held the pencil, her grip firm and confident. I watched the intense concentration on her face, the slight furrow of her brow, the way her tongue would sometimes press against the inside of her cheek. She wasn't drawing me or my apartment. She was drawing from memory, it seemed, her hand flying across the page, creating the swirling grain of a piece of wood, the delicate joint of a chair leg. She was completely absorbed in her own world, and yet her presence filled my entire apartment. The air, which had once been so still and sterile, now felt charged, alive. It vibrated with the soft scratch of her pencil on paper, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. I tried to resent her for it, for disturbing my peace, but the resentment wouldn't stick. Instead, I found myself studying her, cataloging the details my brief glances hadn't captured. The small, silvery scar that cut through her left eyebrow, the strength in her forearms, visible even under the sleeves of her worn flannel shirt, the way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear, a gesture that was both absent-minded and achingly graceful. It was a dangerous game, this observation. It was how it had started with Chloe, too. The padichi, noticing, the cataloging of small, intimate details until they built a mosaic in my mind, a complete picture of a person I thought I couldn't live without. I was falling into the same trap, and I felt a fresh wave of panic. I stood up abruptly, the book falling to the floor with a loud thud. Alara looked up, her pencil stilled, her moss-green eyes wide with surprise. Sorry, I muttered, bending to retrieve the book. I just need some tea. It was an excuse to move, to do something, to break the spell of my own intense focus on her. In the kitchen, I fumbled with the kettle, my hands shaking slightly. I could feel her gaze on my back. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken things. I needed to re-establish my boundaries, to push her away, to remind us both that this was a temporary arrangement born of necessity, not desire. "You're very quiet," she said from the living room. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "I like the quiet," I replied, my back still to her. My voice was sharper than I intended. "I get that," she said, and her tone was so devoid of offense that it disarmed me. "I work with my hands all day in a dusty workshop. The silence is my favorite coworker. It never tells me my dovetail joints are sloppy." I turned around, leaning against the counter, a tea bag dangling from my fingers. A small smile played on her lips. It transformed her face, softening the intensity of her concentration. This was the first glimpse of levity, a tiny crack in the tense atmosphere. "Does anyone ever tell you your dovetail joints are sloppy?" I asked, surprising myself. She chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "Only the wood. It's a very honest critic. If you force it, it splits. You have to listen to what it wants." I considered this. You have to listen to what it wants. Chloe had never listened. She had always forced things, bent them to her will, and I had been the one to split over and over again, until there was nothing left but splinters. The thought was so sharp, so painful, that I must have flinched, because the smile on Alara's face faded, replaced by that look of quiet concern. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." "Am I talking too much?" "No," I said quickly. "It's fine. I trailed off, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "I just have a gaping wound in my chest that your simple metaphor just poked with a stick." I turned back to the kettle, willing it to boil. I wanted this conversation to be over. I wanted to retreat back into my shell. Just as the kettle began to whistle, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died. We were plunged into an abrupt, profound darkness. The only light was the frantic blue-white strobing of the lightning outside, which cast the room in stark, monstrous shadows, for a split second at a time. The whistle of the kettle died with a pathetic gurgle as the electric stove lost power. The hum of the refrigerator, the low thrum of the building's ventilation, all of it was gone. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the roar of the storm and the sudden frantic pounding of my own heart. In the darkness, my apartment no longer felt like my own. It was a strange, unfamiliar cave, and I was trapped in it with a stranger. "Okay," Ilara's voice came out of the blackness, startlingly close. "So, that happened." There was no panic in her tone, only a calm acceptance that I found both irritating and deeply reassuring. "Shit," was all I could manage. My hands were gripping the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. I hated the dark. It was a canvas for my anxiety, a space where all my worst fears could take shape and dance. "Candles?" she asked. "Or a flashlight?" I think I have some candles. In the drawer, somewhere." My voice was thin. A flash of lightning illuminated her silhouette for a brief, startling moment. She hadn't moved from the couch, but she was turned towards me, a dark shape in the darkness. "Stay there," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "No sense in both of us stumbling around." "Which drawer?" I gave her a clumsy description of the junk drawer next to the sink. I heard her moving, the soft scuff of her boots on the floor. She moved with a certainty that amazed me, her hands finding the counter, then the drawers, navigating the unfamiliar space with an ease I couldn't fathom. I, on the other hand, was frozen in place, my breath held tight in my chest. The darkness felt suffocating. I could feel the old panic rising, the cold dread that Chloe had so often dismissed as me being dramatic. "It's just a power outage, Maya. Get a grip." There was a soft click, and then a tiny, brave flame bloomed in the darkness. Alara had found the utility lighter I'd forgotten I owned. In its flickering glow, her face was a study in shadow and light. She looked ancient and wise, like a storyteller by a campfire. She found the small box of emergency candles and began lighting them, her movements deft and sure. She placed one on the kitchen counter, one on the coffee table, one on the bookshelf. Each new flame pushed the oppressive darkness back a little further, softening the hard edges of the room and wrapping us in a warm, wavering amber light. The apartment was transformed. It was no longer a sterile void, but an intimate, flickering grotto. The candlelight made everything softer, kinder. It hid the bareness of the walls and made the shadows dance. Alara sat back down on the couch, the sketchbook forgotten on the cushion beside her. I finally unglued myself from the counter and moved into the living room, wrapping my arms around myself. The chill in the air was more pronounced now without the building's heating. "Better?" she asked, her voice low, as if not to disturb the new fragile peace. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if she could see me clearly. "Yeah, thanks." We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the storm. It was a different kind of silence than before. The tension had eased, replaced by a shared sense of vulnerability. We were two people in a small candlelit boat, adrift on a dark and noisy sea. The shared experience, the simple act of her creating light in my darkness, had broken through a layer of my defenses without me even realizing it. "You seem like you're hiding out from the world in here," she said, her voice so soft it was almost part of the rain's sound. It was the same observation as before, but in the candlelight, it felt less like a diagnosis and more like a gentle inquiry. The question or statement hung in the air between us. The old me, the pre-Chloe me, would have made a joke. The post-Chloe me wanted to build the wall higher, to say, "It's none of your business." But the woman I was in that moment, sitting in the flickering dark with this calm, capable stranger, just felt tired. Tired of the walls, tired of the lies, tired of the fortress. A small, painful truth escaped before I could stop it. "I am," I whispered. The admission felt huge, a boulder I'd been holding in my chest that had finally rolled free. It was a bad breakup. Really bad." The words were inadequate. They were a tiny cup trying to hold an entire ocean of pain. "I'm not good at people anymore." I expected a platitude. "I'm sorry to hear that. It gets better. There are other fish in the sea." Chloe would have seen it as an opening, a weakness to exploit. "Oh, baby, what did she do to you? Tell me everything so I know how to hurt you later." But Alara just nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the dancing flame of the candle on the coffee table. She didn't press for details. She didn't offer empty reassurances. She just let my words sit in the space between us, giving them weight and respect. "People are complicated," she said after a moment. "They're not like wood. Wood tells you the truth. If there's a knot, a weakness, you can see it. You can work around it, or you can decide it's not the right piece for what you're trying to build. People, they hide their knots. Sometimes they don't even know they're there until they split right in your hands." My breath caught in my throat. She had taken my shapeless, overwhelming pain and given it a form I could understand. A knot, a hidden weakness. That's what Chloe had been. A beautiful piece of wood with a fatal hidden flaw. And I had tried to build a life out of it, and it had shattered, taking me with it. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry for months pricked at the back of my eyes. I blinked them back fiercely. I would not cry in front of this woman. "You're a furniture restorer, right?" I asked, changing the subject, desperate to steer the conversation away from the raw wound she had so effortlessly exposed. She seemed to understand, letting me guide us back to safer shores. "Mostly. And I build some things from scratch. I have a workshop downtown. It's my favorite place on earth. Her face softened as she spoke about it, a genuine, unburdened love shining in her eyes. I left a much bigger city, a more complicated life to come here. My ex used to say I love sawdust more than I loved her. A wry, sad smile touched her lips. She wasn't wrong, in the end. There it was, reciprocity, a piece of her own story, offered up so quietly, so freely. It was a bridge, built from her vulnerability to mine. We were more alike than I had realized. Two women who had sought refuge from complicated people in the quiet, honest company of our work. The knowledge settled in me, not with a crash, but with a quiet sense of recognition. My fortress suddenly felt a little less like a fortress and a little more like a shared hiding place. "What kind of complicated?" I asked, my curiosity overriding my caution. She looked at me, her eyes deep and thoughtful in the flickering light. "The kind that wants you to be a beautiful painting in a frame, something to be admired, but not something that gets dirty or tired, or has opinions that don't match the decor." She shook her head slightly. "I like getting dirty. I like being tired after a long day's work, and my opinions rarely match the decor." I couldn't help but laugh, a real, genuine laugh that felt like it came from a part of me I thought had died. "I know that kind," I said, and the sense of camaraderie was so potent, it was almost dizzying. The storm continued to rage, but inside my apartment, a different kind of weather system was developing. The air was no longer tense. It was filled with a quiet, humming energy. We talked for what felt like hours. We didn't talk about our exes again. We talked about her work, the way she could feel the history in an old piece of furniture, the stories it held. She talked about the different personalities of wood, the stubbornness of oak, the forgiveness of pine, the dramatic flair of walnut. I talked about my work as a freelance archivist, of the quiet thrill of piecing together a life from a box of forgotten letters and photographs. We were both archaeologists of a sort, sifting through the past, looking for stories. We got hungry. My non-electric food options were limited to a can of chickpeas, some crackers, and a slightly bruised apple. We decided to make a strange candlelit picnic on the floor. I was fumbling with the can opener in the near darkness when the can slipped, and I nearly dropped it on my foot. Alara's hand shot out, her fingers closing over mine to steady the can. Her touch was electric. It wasn't a brief accidental brush like before. Her fingers were wrapped around mine, her palm warm and firm against the back of my hand. The can opener was trapped between us. The whole world seemed to shrink to that single point of contact. I could feel the calluses on her fingertips, the strength in her grip. I could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin, something like soap and rain. My heart did a slow, heavy drum roll in my chest. I looked up from our hands to her face. She was already looking at me, her expression unreadable in the wavering light. Her eyes were dark pools, and I felt like I was falling into them. The air grew thick, heavy. The sound of the rain faded to a distant roar. There was only the space between us, charged and humming, the warmth of her hand on mine. She didn't pull away. I didn't pull away. We stayed like that for a long moment, a tableau in the candlelight. It was the turn, the moment when the entire landscape of our interaction shifted. The ground beneath my feet, which had felt so solid in my solitude, suddenly felt treacherous and unstable. This was no longer about a neighbor borrowing coffee. This wasn't about seeking shelter from a storm. This was something else entirely. Something terrifying and beautiful and utterly undeniable. The attraction that had been a low hum in the background of my thoughts was now a deafening roar. My carefully constructed walls, already weakened, were beginning to crumble into dust. Slowly, as if moving through water, she released my hand. Her fingers trailed over mine as she pulled back, a ghost of a touch that left my skin burning. "Careful," she said, her voice a low murmur. I wasn't sure if she was talking about the can of chickpeas or something else entirely. She took the can opener from me, her movements deliberate, and opened the can with a few efficient turns. Neither of us mentioned what had just happened. We didn't have to. The knowledge of it hung in the air between us, a tangible thing. The platonic safety of our shared predicament was gone, vaporized in that single, sustained touch. We ate our strange meal in a new kind of silence. It wasn't the tense silence of before, nor the comfortable silence of shared stories. It was a charged, humming silence, filled with the things we weren't saying. Every time she looked at me, I felt it like a physical touch. Every time I looked at her, I felt a pull, a magnetic force I was powerless to resist. My body was betraying me at every turn. It wanted to be closer to her. It yearned for the warmth of her hand, the low timbre of her voice, the quiet solidity of her presence. My mind, my scarred and terrified mind, was screaming in protest. This is how it starts. This is the path to ruin. Run. The apartment grew colder as the night wore on. The storm showed no signs of letting up. A damp chill seeped in through the window frames. I was shivering, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the nervous energy coursing through me. Alara noticed. "You're freezing," she said. "It's fine," I lied, my teeth chattering slightly. "No, it's not." She stood up and looked around my Spartan apartment. "Do you have any extra blankets?" "Just one," I admitted. "On the bed." It was a heavy quilt, the only thing of comfort I had allowed myself to keep. She disappeared into my bedroom and returned a moment later with the quilt. It was an old, patchwork thing my grandmother had made, heavy and soft. She didn't just hand it to me. She unfolded it and draped it over my shoulders, her hands lingering for a moment on my arms. The simple, caring gesture undid me. It was so gentle, so kind. Chloe had never been kind like this. Her gestures of affection had always been performative, demanding something in return. This was just care. "Here," Alara said, sitting down on the couch again, closer than before. She pulled one end of the quilt over her own lap. "We can share." And so we sat, side by side on my gray couch, huddled together under my grandmother's quilt, the candlelight flickering around us. The proximity was dizzying. Her thigh was pressed against mine, a solid line of warmth from hip to knee. I could feel the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. I was hyper-aware of every tiny detail. The scent of her hair, damp from the rain. The soft, worn texture of her flannel shirt against my arm. The quiet, steady rhythm of her presence. My mind was a battlefield. One half of me was screaming, a primal, terrified shriek of self-preservation. The other half was melting, softening, leaning into her warmth like a flower turning towards the sun. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to run to the other side of the room. But I was frozen, trapped by the magnetic pull of her, by the profound, aching loneliness that her presence was suddenly making me feel. I hadn't realized how truly alone I was until I wasn't anymore. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The air was thick with unspoken attraction, with questions neither of us dared to ask. We just sat there, listening to the rain, sharing a small pocket of warmth in the cold, dark night. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day, of the storm, of the intense emotional whiplash, began to catch up with me. My eyelids felt heavy. My head nodded once, and I jerked it back up. "We should try to get some sleep," Alara said, her voice a soft rumble beside me. The couch was too small for both of us to lie down comfortably. The floor was cold. The unspoken solution hung in the air, a terrifying and inevitable conclusion. My bedroom, My bed, my one true sanctuary, the last bastion of my fortress. The thought of her in my bed was both petrifying and deeply, thrillingly appealing. The bed's big enough, I heard myself say, the words feeling like they were spoken by someone else. A braver, more reckless version of me. If you want, you can take the bed. I'll take the couch. She turned her head to look at me. In the dim light, her face was all angles and shadows. Don't be ridiculous, she said softly. We're both adults. We can share. I promise I don't bite. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Unless you're a poorly constructed dovetail joint. The small joke was enough to break the tension. Just for a second. I let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. Okay, I whispered. Okay. The walk to the bedroom felt like a mile. The tension was back, 1,000 times stronger than before. This was a line, and we were about to cross it. In the bedroom, lit by a single candle we brought from the living room, the bed seemed enormous, a vast, white expanse of potential intimacy. It was the stage for the final act of this strange, storm-tossed play. We undressed in near silence, not down to our skin, but to layers that felt appropriate for sleeping. For me, a t-shirt and shorts. For her, a tank top, and the flannel pants she'd been wearing. I was careful not to look at her, but I could see her silhouette in my peripheral vision, the strong lines of her back and shoulders. My own movements were clumsy, my fingers fumbling with my clothes. We got into bed from opposite sides, like two opposing armies taking their positions. The mattress dipped under her weight. I lay stiffly on my edge, my back to her, my muscles clenched so tight they ached. The space between us felt like a canyon, but I was also aware of her presence down to a cellular level. I could feel the warmth she radiated. I could hear the soft sound of her breathing. Every tiny creak of the bed frame as she shifted her weight was a thunderclap in the silence. My mind was a chaotic torrent of thoughts. What is happening? Who is this woman? Why does she feel so safe and so dangerous at the same time? I replayed the entire night in my head. The knock on the door, the shared coffee beans, the flash flood warning, the candlelight, the touch of her hand on mine. It felt like a dream, like something happening to someone else. And underneath it all, the ghost of Chloe whispered her poison. She'll be just like me. She'll find your weaknesses, and she'll break you. You're a fool for letting her this close. I tried to focus on my breathing, to calm the frantic beating of my heart, but it was impossible. The air was too charged. I could feel the heat of her body across the small distance that separated us, a pull as undeniable as gravity. I wondered if she was awake too, if she was lying there, staring into the darkness, as aware of me as I was of her. Was her heart pounding? Was she fighting the same battle between fear and desire? I had no way of knowing. She was a mystery, a calm, solid island in the storm of my own making. Hours seemed to pass. The storm outside began to quiet, its fury spent, replaced by a steady drumming rain. The silence inside the room grew louder, more profound. I lay there, rigid, listening to her breathe, and a profound, aching sadness washed over me. I was so tired of being afraid. I was so tired of being alone. And here, in my bed, was a person who made me feel, for the first time in a very long time, like I didn't have to be either of those things. But the risk felt monumental. The potential for pain was a chasm at my feet. Just as I was starting to drift into a restless, shallow sleep, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I'd plugged it into a small battery pack I kept for emergencies. The screen lit up the darkness, casting a cold blue light on the ceiling. I reached for it, my heart sinking. It was a text from my sister Kate. I'd ignored an earlier call from her. The message read, "Chloe called Mom. Said you're not answering her calls? She's worried. You need to call me. Now." A cold, sick dread washed over me, instantly erasing the fragile warmth that had begun to build in the room. Chloe, of course. Her timing was always impeccable. Her ability to insert herself into my life at the most vulnerable moments was a dark superpower. She wasn't worried. She was controlling. She was checking her snares. The fact that she'd gone through my mother was a classic move, designed to corner me, to leverage family against me. I slid out of bed, my movements jerky. I couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, too intimate for the ugly wave of my past that had just crashed into it. I have to. I need to take this, I whispered into the darkness, not even sure if Alara was awake. A soft murmur from her side of the bed. Everything okay? Her voice was thick with sleep. Yeah, fine, I lied, and fled to the living room, my phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. I stood by the window, watching the rain-slicked street glisten in the occasional passing headlight. I called Kate. Her voice was a mixture of frustration and genuine concern. Maya, what is going on? Chloe is spinning out. She told Mom you just disappeared on her, that you're not well. She's lying, Kate, I said, my voice trembling with a rage that felt cold and old. We broke up. I moved out. I told her I needed space. This is not space. This is harassment. I know she can be a lot, my sister conceded, but maybe you should just talk to her, clear the air, for Mom's sake if nothing else. She's so worried. The familiar trap. The expectation that I should be the one to manage Chloe's emotions, to soothe her manufactured crises, to make everyone else comfortable at my own expense. The weight of it was crushing. No, I said, the word a small, hard stone in my throat. I'm not doing it anymore, Kate. I can't. I ended the call, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I felt raw, exposed, all my progress from the evening stripped away, leaving me back in that place of fear and pain. The fortress walls were back up, higher and thicker than ever. I was a fool to think I could let them down, even for a night. I turned, and my heart leaped into my throat. Alara was standing in the bedroom doorway, a silhouette against the single candle's flame. She wasn't wearing her tank top. She had pulled on her flannel shirt, unbuttoned over it. She was just watching me, her expression shrouded in shadow. I had no idea how much she had heard, but from the quiet intensity of her gaze, I knew it was enough. Are you okay? She asked again, and this time the question had weight. It wasn't a platitude. It was a real question, demanding a real answer. And that was it, the breaking point. The carefully constructed dam of my self-control, which had been leaking all night, finally burst. A sob escaped me, a ragged, ugly sound. The tears I'd been fighting back for hours, for months, finally came. They streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt which I dragged with me, and shook my head, the silent gesture conveying a world of pain that words couldn't touch. My fortress had crumbled, and I was just a woman, crying in the dark, exposed, and terrified. Alara didn't say anything. She didn't rush to comfort me. She just closed the distance between us, her movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. She stopped a foot away from me, giving me space. She just stood there, her presence a solid, unwavering anchor in my swirling vortex of emotion. When I finally risked a glance up at her face, her expression was one of profound, heartbreaking empathy. There was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. You don't have to be okay right now, she said, her voice a low, steady murmur that cut through my sobs. She reached out, not to touch me, but just holding her hand in the space between us, an offering. I looked at her hand, calloused and strong, the hand of a creator, a restorer, and without thinking, I put my own trembling hand in hers. Her fingers closed around mine, warm and firm. She gently tugged my hand, pulling me forward until I was standing in front of her. She used her other hand to gently cut my jaw, her thumb stroking away a tear from my cheek. The touch was so tender, so full of a care I hadn't felt in years, that it broke me all over again. I leaned into her touch, a silent surrender, and then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not at first. It was a kiss of comfort, of acceptance. It was soft and slow, a quiet promise in the dark. It tasted of rain and tea and something that was just her. It said, I see you. I see your pain. And I'm not afraid of it. It was the kindest kiss I had ever received. And as I melted into it, as I let myself feel the safety and the warmth of it, the comfort slowly, inevitably began to smolder, to catch fire. My sob turned into a shaky breath. I kissed her back, my hand coming up to tangle in her soft, damp curls. The kiss deepened, the gentle pressure becoming more insistent. The dam had broken, and now a flood of a different kind was rushing through me. A flood of need, of want, of a desperate, starved longing for a connection that didn't hurt. The quilt slipped from my shoulders and pooled on the floor around our feet as I pressed myself closer to her, seeking a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This was the cascade, the complete, terrifying, beautiful surrender. Later, we were back in bed. This time, there was no canyon between us. We lay facing each other, tangled together under the quilt, my head on her shoulder, her arm wrapped securely around me. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving behind a profound quiet. The world washed clean. The single candle on the nightstand had burned down to a flickering nub, casting a soft, intimate glow. The air was no longer charged with tension, but with a deep, settled peace. We talked, in quiet, sleepy whispers. We filled in the spaces that our earlier conversations had only sketched out. I told her everything about Chloe. The love bombing at the beginning, the slow, insidious erosion of my confidence, the gaslighting, the isolation from my friends. It all came pouring out, the ugly, shameful truths I had kept locked away. Alara listened without judgment, her hand stroking my hair, her thumb tracing small, soothing circles on my back. When I was done, my voice hoarse, I felt a familiar pang of fear. I had shown her the ugliest, most broken parts of myself. Now she would run. Now she would see that I was too damaged, too much work. I don't know how to do this, I whispered into the hollow of her throat. Without getting destroyed. She was quiet for a long moment. I held my breath. Then she shifted, propping herself up on one elbow to look down at me. Her face was serious, her moss-green eyes searching mine in the dim light. Then we go slow, she said, her voice firm but gentle. As slow as you need. We can just be neighbors who had a weird night because of a storm. Or we can be neighbors who get coffee tomorrow. Or we can be something else. But you get to decide the pace, always. She brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead. This is your space, your bed. I know how this looks. I want you to know I expect nothing. This, she gestured between us, was beautiful. But it doesn't have to mean anything you're not ready for it to mean. Her words were a balm on my raw nerves. She saw the power imbalance. She saw my fear. And she didn't try to dismiss it or fix it. She simply gave me the power. She gave me the control I had lost for so long. In that moment, the last vestiges of my fear began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative shoot of hope. The sun came up, pale and watery, filtering through my blinds. The power was still out, but the apartment was filled with a soft, gray morning light. The world outside was quiet, dripping. Getting dressed felt different this morning. There was an awkwardness, yes, but it was a soft, hopeful kind of awkwardness, not the sharp-edged tension of the night before. Ilara had to leave, to go check on her own apartment. I hope it's not a swamp, she said, pulling on her boots by the door. Me too, I said, leaning against the doorframe, hugging my arms around myself. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, and turned to me. Hey, she said softly. She stepped forward and gave me a quick, gentle kiss. I'll text you later about that coffee. A real smile lit up her face. The kind you can actually borrow this time. I'd like that, I said, and the words were true. After she left, I stood in my silent apartment. It didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a home, a place where something new and unexpected had happened. The air still held the faint scent of her, of rain and sawdust and warmth. I walked over to the window and looked out at the clean-washed city. The world felt different. I felt different. I pulled out my phone. The screen was still on the message from my sister. I looked at it for a long moment, at the mention of Chloe's name, a name that had held so much power over me for so long. I took a deep, steadying breath. I opened my contacts, scrolled down to her name, and my thumb hovered over the delete button. It was just one small action, a few pixels on a screen, but it felt monumental. It was a choice. It was a promise to myself. I pressed down, contact deleted, a wave of relief, so pure and so profound, washed over me. I was choosing a different story now. It was a story I didn't know the ending to, a story that was still terrifying. But for the first time in a very long time, it was a story that felt like my own. When you've built your entire world around avoiding pain, how do you ever find the courage to let in the person who might just be your greatest joy? Sometimes, all it takes is a knock on the door, a shared storm, and the quiet promise of a new morning. If you found a piece of your own story in this one, please consider liking this video, subscribing for more stories, and leaving a comment to share your thoughts.